Welcome to the For Love and Money podcast, the show where business and social purpose meet to inspire a movement for positive change. Here's your host, Carolyn Butler-Madden.
My guest today is a champion for the UN Sustainable Development Goals, otherwise known as the Global Goals or the World's To-Do List. If you aren't aware of these goals, now's your time to learn about them through this episode. Mick Hase is the founder of 17x, a movement designed to engage the business community with the Sustainable Development Goals. As an impact-driven entrepreneur, Mick and his brand exist to connect companies together to use business to build solutions to the world's biggest challenges. 17x uses TEDx-like speaking events to showcase how leaders and founders are using their business as a force for good in the world and aligning with the global goals. Now, 17x Tours Australia each year with its events, and it's building a huge community of values-aligned brands and people. Mick is also a dad of 2 boys, husband to a great wife, Renee, and keen ocean lover and surfer. He's also a public speaker and workshop facilitator, and he is an energetic and engaging speaker with a real passion for connecting people to their impact, engaging humans through purpose, and how to lead people with aligned values. Mick, welcome to the For Love and Money podcast.
Carolyn, I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to getting into this conversation and also really getting into the global goals a little bit more in depth because, it's interesting. I think a lot of us in this area think that everyone knows about the global goals, and yet I still meet a lot of people who don't.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I still meet plenty of people that are doing great things in the world, but yeah, maybe they're just not on the global goals kind of train just yet.
Right. Now, look, I always kick off with the same first question for our guests, which is when you think about business or when you think about purpose in business, does love have a role to play? What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think you got to love what you do, right? And I was thinking about something along these lines earlier around, your purpose and that whole Simon Sinek thing around finding your why. They have to have some kind of link to your personal love of what you like to do, right? So, I'm still kind of going through that. What is our actual impact model? What are we here to do with 17x? But when I really think deeply, it comes back to that just connecting great humans together. And I absolutely love doing that anyway. I'm a fairly social person when it comes down to it. So, loving what you do and aligning that with why you exist personally, I think absolutely there's a bridge there.
Yeah, brilliant. And I'm keen to hear your backstory. And to explore that even further through, what brought you here? Give us a little bit of your background, but I'd love to understand, what brought you to doing this thing specifically?
Yeah, that's a cool question because my background is, I don't necessarily have a massive success story, if you like. I'm just a regular guy. I am a dad of 2 boys. I live in country New South Wales. I have a mortgage. I certainly love to surf. My upbringing was quote unquote kind of very normal. Working mum and dad. I grew up in Lismore, which many of you have probably heard about recently, getting a bit wet. Shout out to everyone in Lismore getting back on their feet. And through my 20s and 30s, I was kind of moving around trying to figure out, what do I want to do with my career, my life, and chopped and changes, different jobs, and lived in different countries and kind of did that exploration thing. And I guess I never really found, purpose is the right word at the time, but I never really found what felt very natural for me to sit in with a career or, a business that I wanted to really push forward with. And I'd say probably a few life events changed that up for me in my late 30s. Becoming a dad, I think, is a big culture shock for a young man that spent. I didn't become a dad until I was 30, which isn't necessarily late, but going from a young guy that was kind of living a fairly invincible life, cruising around the world at times and, being very free, and then obviously having this other little human that all of a sudden you're responsible for, I think gave me a little bit of that snapshot into, okay, there's bigger things than just doing my own stuff. So it's certainly becoming a dad. My wife, Renee, she got quite sick. She's okay now, but she had an adventure with cancer.
Oh no.
Which she's okay now and fully recovered. But as a young family, that was probably a bit of a wake-up call for me as well, to kind of think, what is the big picture, and maybe there are some bigger things to be a part of. So that, I think that certainly played a part. And then I had I think the benefit of meeting some really interesting people, right place, right time, that opened my eyes to the idea of, reciprocity, doing good, contribution, but how you can actually embed that into not just the way that you live, but the way that, you can run a business, and that businesses don't necessarily need to be all about, how much money can we make and go and buy more stuff, but how can we use, business as a way to create, certainly success, but also create, some purposeful outcomes, whether for the people that work within the business or the, the community around it and the stakeholders. So I think that'd be my combination of how I ended up with doing this. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, when I started thinking about 17x, I had someone tell me, it's a shit idea, you can't do it.
Oh no.
And that probably spurred me on too. And I went, right, let's see what happens.
But well, wait, how could anyone, I'm trying to imagine that conversation.
Yeah, it was a good one. I won't name them out of respect, because I think they were probably just more trying to give me some reality of running an events company is probably the
right.
way to
Okay.
say it. I reached out to someone who ran at the time a fairly large exhibition style event, and I said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this thing, would love some advice. And all of the advice was, don't do it.
Okay.
And I think inside of that, I am very competitive. So yeah, that was probably a nice little motivator.
Thank goodness you are, well. Mick.
Yeah, it's funny that I don't know if it's arrogance or a healthy combination of maybe arrogance and self-belief, and there's somewhere in the mix there where it's like, well, if you tell me that I can't do it, well, maybe I'll just have a crack, and hey, you might be right, but at least we can have a go. So that's kind of how I've been operating with this for a little while.
Yeah, okay.
See where we end up. Build the plane on the way down.
And I wonder, I mean, you talk about arrogance and self-belief, but because it was connected to this, I don't know, awakening of, seeking a bigger picture and more meaning, and, having children, and how it's shifted your thinking. I wonder how much that had to play into it. I wonder if it was just a self-serving event and you'd been given that advice, whether your arrogance and self-belief would have been enough to keep you going.
Yeah, well, that's right. I think, having, and this is where we work with, when you work with teams about how we can embed purpose into their culture that really engages people. Certainly the same thing goes for founders and people operating their own, social enterprise or startup or moving into this purpose-driven world, is that when the road gets a bit rough or things look like, oh man, what am I doing? Then that obviously, I think Steve Jobs talked about this years ago, right? Is that aligned values and purpose is kind of what makes it all worthwhile. You go, well, hang on a minute, there's more to it than just, ticking a few boxes. And that's the energy, and I guess the motivation to just work through it and make things happen. So I'd say that if I was just out to try and make money, 17x probably wouldn't have survived, because in the first year we aligned it all with charity and gave all the money away.
Yeah, not the sort of thing you do with a normal business.
No, not at all. Oh, I love it.
Yeah, brilliant. So, look, can you do me a favor and just give some background to listeners who aren't familiar with the global goals?
Yeah,
They'll be wondering why it's called 17X for a start.
yeah, I
Um,
do get that.
yeah, but yeah, if you could give background into the global goals, we haven't actually had an episode where we've gone into them in
Yeah,
depth, and we don't need to go too detailed. But yeah, just give us that sort of overview.
yeah. So look, 2015, the UN and global leaders all got together, and they basically, in a nutshell, said the world's not in a great place. We need to fix it, or we're all stuffed. And they came out of that conversation with 17 goals, and they are I guess, an evolution of the millennial goals that were before that. Um, and the whole idea is that global leaders, countries, and now, particularly over, say, the last, say, 5 or 6 years, it's really becoming a blueprint for companies and both large and small to get involved. Um, so the 17 goals cover an array of different, very macro, big picture challenges that the world faced, and they are broken down into smaller KPIs that you can get really micro into if you like. So I think the beauty of the global goals for me is that depending on what area you're playing in, whether you are a small or a large business, you can go macro or micro with them and still make a dent. And you can go community based versus national and international and global. And they are scalable in that sense in terms of the impact that you want to create. So you don't have to fix the world's problem around poverty. You can just manage that in your own community, right? So the 17 global goals, as they are referred to, as you said, they cover off really the natural environment. They cover off, biodiversity and all, they also cover off a whole bunch of areas around society, and then, some around, I guess, business and economics, if you like. But effectively, it really is a great way to cover off all areas. And the beauty of it is that you don't have to cover all 17, and that's a real, I guess, key learning for anyone looking at these things and trying to figure out, well, how do I start? Because there's 17 really big goals. Like, for an example, number one is no poverty, right? Now, that's a really big goal. And to achieve that, so the global goals are set up to be achieved by 2030. It's the 2030 agenda. No poverty, it's kind of a big thing. And quality education is another one. Equality, reduced inequalities, I think, is really important. There's ones around climate action, looking after our ocean, our lands, and then right through to, number 17 is where we play, is around partnerships for the goals and how we can actually work together. And going back to the idea that depending on what you're up to, and you talk about love and purpose and kind of finding what are we here to exist for, and just pick one. You only have to pick one, because if I pick one and you pick one and they're different, that's cool and happy days. And by the time we've all done that, then everything's covered off. And what they really do is provide a great blueprint for companies to look at: how do we start? Where do we start? What are some things that we should be working on? And they're a great engagement tool for that as well.
Yeah, and it's really interesting with the goals. You can start with one, but you soon discover that they're all interconnected, aren't they?
Absolutely, yeah.
In different ways. So you might start with one, and then you actually find you're contributing to another goal, and it becomes really motivating as well.
Absolutely. And then there's also some complexity inside that as well, is where that whilst you're, working on one, there's possibility to both positively and actually negatively affect other goals. So there's actually now, the impact measurement is kind of the next stage. We've all kind of gotten on board with hopefully most of us are getting on board or already on board with, we know why this stuff needs to happen. We know why climate change is a problem. We are starting to understand better what the solutions are and how we can go about fixing these things. But measurement is kind of the next part. How do we actually measure that and make sure that we are, understanding how we're moving the needle on these challenges? And part of that impact measurement shows, how we can make sure that there is I guess, coexisting impact across multiple goals without negatively affecting others, if that makes sense. So it is a challenge in some ways, but other ways, you may be working on bringing water to people in need around the world, and that in effect is also helping out with the poverty side of things. And most likely, if you're working with communities, you're starting to employ people, and it starts to, as you say, you really evolve through it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I remember one famous story that came out years ago was Tom's. Do you remember when Tom started and it was Tom's shoes? And they had the 1-for-1 model, and they were doing amazing things until Blake McCoskey found out. It was a rather rude awakening. He found out that they were putting local shoemakers in where was it, South America, out of business. And did you hear about that story?
And how many shoes are ending up in kind of landfill and all that kind of stuff. And that's, I think it's kind of the naivety, I think, that can come along with this area, but I think it shouldn't be shunned. Like, that's yes, it's not a great outcome, and putting in some remedy to fix that is perhaps,
which they did, right? They ended up using that information to make sure that 70%, I think it was 70% of the shoes they sourced came from local businesses. So the point is not to use that as an excuse, not to do anything in the first place. It's more understanding that once you start on this journey, you start to become conscious about all sorts of implications and impacts, and that can only be a good thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the organizations that help with some of the measurement and like a B Corp, for example, they're really encouraging, well, actually, mandating that companies are looking at the wider stakeholder effect of their companies, which I think is really valid. So, but you can't understand that until you go down that path, right? So starting even with 10% better than what you used to do in certain things is great. And then as you progress through this and looking wider through the company footprint, not just in your immediate circle, then obviously it's going to open up other doors to get better and better as you go. But certainly not being able to get it 100% right from the very start is not the excuse to not start looking at how your company can create some good in the world. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and there are easy ways to start. You talked about B Corp, and I plan to do an episode on B Corp. We're actually a certified B Corp, and it's not an easy undertaking to become B Corp certified.
Yep.
It's a brilliant, absolutely amazing process to go through, because it opens your eyes to just how many levers there are to create impact. And I'm right in the center of the impact space, and it opened my eyes wide to things I hadn't even thought about.
Yeah, sure.
So it's a fantastic process, but it's comprehensive and it takes time. And there are ways you can get started that are simpler. So I noticed you're a Pledge 1% member, aren't you, Mick?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about Pledge 1%, because I see you've got an initiative around Pledge 1% too.
Yeah, well, look, Pledge 1% is really easy. That was started by the Atlassian and Salesforce kind of founders and leadership teams years ago. The whole movement around Pledge 1% is simply it's a promise that you make as a brand. That's all it is. It doesn't cost you anything to be a part of their movement or their community. And the whole idea is that you pledge 1% of either your revenue, your profit, your product, or your time to whatever cause you want. So again, it's nothing that they control. It's just saying, yep, we pledge that we're going to give a minimum of 1%. Now, I think the beauty of it is it doesn't have to be money based, because, particularly if you're thinking of the smaller social enterprise crew that are starting up, it's hard. Even the larger guys, it's hard. Like this is not not an easy industry to be in, and there's a lot of conversations around at the moment around how to actually unlock funding for, for social enterprises. So the beauty about Pledge 1% is that you can do things like donate 1% of your time or your product to causes that you're passionate about. So they're directly aligned with what you do. We're running a Pledge 250 campaign through our 17x Australian Tour this year, just as a way to try and engage our community with the idea that, hey, here's a great place to start in terms of what is the promise that you want to make to the world through your business. And, having metrics like 1%, whether it's 1%, 5%, whatever you're actually doing, that's cool. But saying that, drawing that line in the sand that we are going to give a minimum of 1% to the products that we care about, or the causes we care about, then it's nice. It's a nice kind of flag in the sand to say this is where we're starting. And I think, things like Pledge 1%. We're also a member of B1G1, which I've been partnered with those guys for over 10 years now. Masami Satu in Singapore founded that, and along with Paul Dunn, and they have this international community of companies looking at how they can embed transaction-based giving into their business model. So our tickets with our company are tickets for good for all of our events, and our ticket holders can choose whether they educate people, whether they provide water or plant trees straight off the back of their tickets. And it's a fair bit more than 1%, but that just allows us also to unlock transaction-based giving into just everyday business, right? Just as we run our business, good things happen.
Yeah, and it's almost with B1G1, it's and we've actually had Paul Dunn on as a guest on this podcast.
I didn't realise that.
Yeah, we're also a long time B1G1 member.
Yeah, right.
And the beauty of B1G1 is it is so easy to start. You can start when you're not even making money, because the impacts are, as low as 1 cent or 2 cents. And it's when you just get started with it, because it takes away any excuse of, I need to earn more money before I can do that. Yeah. It integrates impact into the everyday of your business, as you said. It moves away from giving back into giving forward.
Yeah, sure. And I love that you say that they make it easy. Platforms like that, and the Pledge 1% is similar as well, where it's just so easy, and it's kind of, there are no excuses, because 1% of your time, if you think about that, that's pretty doable. I think if anyone sat down and actually mapped out, all right, how am I going to roster in 1% of my time to do A, B, or C into what I'm keen about? When you actually write down 1% of your time as in the span of minutes, you probably go, well, hang on a minute, I probably can times that by at least 5 or 10, because that's not a lot of time.
Yeah.
And the B1G1 movement's really cool, because, as you say, you can automate it, and you can start small and scale up as you grow. I've personally been a member of B1G1 in various different businesses for the last, I think 2009 is when we started, or when I started. So it's an easy automated process. So, but one thing I'd love to stress on this, Carolyn, is I had this really great experience at our Brisbane event earlier this year. We had our second event of the year at QUT in Brisbane, and I had this young guy. I think he was only 21-year-old, and he came up to me afterwards and he said, "Hey, I've got a question for you," and this is really interesting. He says, "Why are all these people talking about giving all their money away?" Because we just had our 6 speakers, and a few of them had this kind of almost like a earn one, give one, or donate kind of model, right? And he was like, "Well, if I'm trying to make money, I'm trying to keep it, right? Because I need to, I want to buy a house, I want to do this stuff." And I said, "Well," and I spent the time trying to convince him that giving was good. And I felt like I really didn't answer that question right. And it sat with me for a couple of days. And I kind of circled back around to him. And I really think that there's a big difference between how you're giving and how you're living. Is kind of
Yeah.
the light bulb I had around it, and having a purpose-driven business or a purpose-driven life shouldn't be measured on how much you give. It should be measured more on just how you live. And
Yes.
if giving isn't within your means right now because of either financial or structural or whatever it is, barriers within the business that make giving not achievable, certainly living within purpose pillars is where maybe the yardstick should be measured. So my example to him was, you don't have to give away money to be an awesome person. If you want to be as a 21-year-old guy, right? Here's a good thing: you can be a champion for women, and make sure that you're an ally for young women when you're out and about with your friends, partying on the weekend. And if you see men, whether young men, whether they're in your circle or other men, and they might be getting a little bit too excited and maybe degrading women at the bar or whatever in those kind of social circles as a young guy, you can stand into that and live into that and stand up for that. And that's you living a purposeful, meaningful life, and you're contributing to SDG 5 around equality. So you can live in that way rather than having to worry about what is it that you're going to give. And giving just can be a part of purpose later. So
I
think that's
love
really
that. I
important.
love that you've shared that, Nick. And what I love about it is um, giving is just one aspect of purpose, right?
Yeah.
And this idea of giving back is the easiest thing for people to grasp. I have a business, I make my business successful and I give back.
Yeah.
But it's just one example of how you can do that. What's happening is we're seeing the growth of I've heard it described as Mission 2.0 businesses
Right.
who are starting a business. They actually decide on the problem they want to solve before they decide on the business that will solve it.
Yeah,
And
sure.
these aren't non-profits, they're not social enterprises. They are people who are committed to solving a problem, whether it's an environmental problem or otherwise. So we've had quite a few on this podcast already. We've had Pearly. So Dr. Kyle Turner is the founder of Pearly, and his mission is to make oral hygiene accessible to everybody. So they've developed this business called Pearly, which is an app which gives free dental healthcare. Like you get free dental healthcare checks.
Yeah.
And it then connects you to dentists. So it really helps people in remote Australia, for example, who might not have access to dental health care at all. So they've built this business model around that. There's Good Citizens Eyewear, who they decided they wanted to untrash the planet, and the eyewear business or sunglasses business wasn't the first thought. It was, how do we remove plastic waste from our environment? And they've come up with a model where, one pair of Good Citizen sunnies is made by one 600 ml plastic bottle. 100% made, including the hinge, which was a really, really challenging thing for them. And there's a whole host of these businesses. So it's not just about giving back. Giving back is the easiest way for people to understand, but it's using your business to solve society's problems. As you say, I love the way you put it. There's a big difference between how you're giving and how you're living. I love that. I love it.
Yeah. And
Enjoying the podcast? If you're looking for more inspiration, head to our website, thecauseeffect.com.au, for more resources on how you can start using your business as a force for good. Or buy the For Love and Money book. Every copy sold allows us to protect 1 square metre of rainforest. Help us save 10,000 square metres by 2025.
something you touch on there is a friend of mine, Eli Harrell from Valhalla, and he works in edutech, helping founders create technologies that can help with the education gap. And he does talk about how to create businesses to fix human-centered problems. And, businesses can just be the vehicle.
Yeah.
Listening to you talk there about the brands reminded me of Dr. Clinton Schultz, the
Yes.
co-founder of Sober Beverages here on the coast. He spoke at our Brisbane event. And one of the great things that he talked about was how he uses First Nations principles from his traditional country as the backbone of the company to run a completely Indigenous founded and employed company. And beer is just the product. In his words, he's like, well, we're not here to sell beer. We're here to create a difference for the Indigenous people of Australia, and in a variety of different ways. And but the beer is just the vehicle on how they do that. And I thought that was really cool, and the way that they use some founding principles from his First Nations community, which is thousands of years old, as the fundamental model for his company. And the transaction part of selling beer is just the vehicle and the means to the ends on how they create that impact. So and I think that's where maybe the innovation pathway can lead us. So some of these challenges are quite large, the climate issue particularly, and the innovation that's required now needs to be at such a scale that the governments must be involved. There has to be a lot of funding to help the private sector innovate at a speed that they need to. And that in itself has nothing to do with giving. That's about innovation and innovating new solutions to do things like capture carbon or change the way we make cement. And that then in itself is just an innovation and a business model that's going to solve a problem, and it has nothing to do with giving. There's absolutely there's a bunch of different ways that companies can get involved with things like the global goals to create outcomes, and it doesn't have to be money based.
Exactly, and it, as you say, it drives innovation. I think that there is no coincidence that the most innovative business lists are dominated by purpose-led businesses and organizations, because if you are truly in service to a higher purpose, which is about solving societal and human problems, you can't help but for it to drive innovation, because you are trying to solve that problem and you are not limited in your thinking to your products or services. It's serving that higher purpose is leading your strategy. That is what being purpose-led means. And the global goals is a fantastic way to drive that innovation. What do they say? The global goals is the biggest business development opportunity for businesses globally. It's like a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity.
I mean, you just sit around Paul Pullman, and just have a listen to some of the stuff that he's talking about. It's the opportunity outweighs. It's just that myopic focus of old school thinking, right? Is what is the short-term loss that we create right now for the long-term gain? And I think that's also something to be really clear about, is that none of this stuff's going to change fast. And I understand that, and I have empathy for that. I understand that our resources sector in this country employs thousands and thousands of people, and that's a lot of homes and families and mortgages and livelihoods that we can't just turn off overnight either, as much as we can't turn off the economics and industry part of that as well. It is a progression and it is a long-term change, but it has to start and it has to be sped up to be as quick as possible. I think some of these bigger companies that are just ticking the box for 2050 maybe need to mirror and turn around and go, if Twiggy's going to do it in 9 years and invest a few billion to make it happen, then why can't we? Speeding up the needle a bit, but it's a transition. It's absolutely a transition, and some companies are doing it and they're putting it in, and others are a little bit slower to the party. It is that the evolution of business, and I think the evolution of that innovation that's going to be required, or is currently required, to fix some of these major challenges, particularly around inequalities, poverty across the world, and certainly climate. I think one of the opportunities that lay in amongst that is the collaboration. You'd see it all the time, and you just have to look at some of these bigger companies that are really leading the pack, Patagonia and Unilever and so forth, is that collaboration over competition is pretty powerful. And we see it through 17x all the time. It's an open door policy to do business together. And you'll see it at Purpose next week, and we saw it at the Social Enterprise World Forum last week or 2 weeks ago. Is nobody's hiding behind their cards and saying, "Oh no, I'm not sharing my info with you." It's not a competitive environment. It is very much a, "Oh, okay, you're working on climate tech, I'm working on climate tech. Let's swap notes and see what's what." And this open door policy to collaborate and do business together creates the opportunities that come out of that. Just are endless, yeah.
Absolutely. And collaboration over competition is one of the most fundamental pillars. There are so many examples of it, and I talk a lot about it in my book, same name as this podcast, For Love and Money. And Intrepid Travel is one example that I think really clarifies it beautifully. When when COVID hit, they went from 5 years of having their best revenue generating successful years to zero. Okay, overnight they went to zero, and they had to lay off their people, which was really hard for them. And being a company that wants to be the best travel company for the world, it was their purpose that actually reconnected them to how they could do that. And collaboration over competition was one of the key things that came out of it. 2 initiatives they had. One was their animal protection toolkit that they developed, which normally, that would be your IP as a business, right?
Sure.
And they actually made it available to the industry and to their competitors for free. They did the same for their 10-point plan to become a carbon neutral business.
Yep.
Actually, it wasn't carbon neutral. I think it was carbon zero. Yeah, again, they made it available to their competitors. And it's this idea of, if we want to be the best travel company for the world, we have to lead our category. We have to help our competitors. Together we've got to be able to do much, much better and change the way we do things. And it's such a powerful philosophy. And I think really taps into, as human beings, the best of us. And once you start thinking that way, it's just, it changes the way you show up and the way you operate.
Absolutely, and there's a bit of accountability in there too, right? You share your plans with everybody else, and there's like, all right, shit, now we've got to make sure we actually deliver on this.
Yeah, built in.
That's the business coach in me coming out. The accountability factor, but yeah, I mean, if you truly stand for that outcome, then for me, there's a great organisation called the Social Good Summit, and they operate basically a very similar thing to what 17x is all about. They run a speaking event every year in Sydney. It's all around the global goals.
Actually, it's Melbourne this year.
They did a Melbourne one recently as well. Their first trip to Melbourne was, I think, last week or the week before.
Yeah.
Sounds like it was great. And shout out to Katya and her team for putting all that together. And when I found out, that they were already around, and I just rang her up and I said, hey, I got this thing. I'm kind of doing the same thing, but how about you come and tell your story on our podcast, and we're both here to drive the agenda for the global goals. So the more that we can do that, then happy days. And I think there was this great thing from Elon Musk recently, and love him or hate him, right? Someone was interviewing him and said, well, and part of his answer was around Tesla, and he was saying that if somebody else comes along and produces a better, more efficient electric car that puts Tesla out of business, he's okay with that, because ultimately it means that the electric vehicle, movement has progressed, and we are better off for a global, society for it. So
Yeah.
at the end of the day, the purpose has been achieved. And if it's not him and someone else, well, yeah, well, okay, the business is going to suffer, but ultimately the purpose and what the company's there to achieve has been achieved. So
Yeah.
happy days.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
And
that's pretty impressive.
that's very impressive. And that is what being led by your purpose is about. I think there are so many businesses out there who have a purpose statement and think they've checked that box and that makes them a purpose-led business. But if it's not leading your strategy, and leading how you collaborate with others to serve that purpose, then you've really got to question it. Now, Mick, we've gone down this rabbit hole, which has been great, but tell us about 17x. I gave a bit of background in the intro, but if you could tell our listeners what it is and what you're doing with it, that would be wonderful.
Cool, thank you. So 17x, we are I think a one-line version is we're a TED-style speaking event designed to engage the business community with the global goals. So what I do is we travel around Australia with an Australian tour and hit a bunch of capital cities. So we started in 2019, did 5 cities with a bit of let's just see what happens attitude. And it went really well and had met some really fascinating people. The whole premise is that we find social enterprise leaders, change makers, circular economy people, whatever titles you want to give that kind of area, all the way up into the corporate ESG sustainability leads, so companies and leaders from all businesses, sizes, shapes, and but generally for-profit business models. And I find these great people and I put them on stage and I give them 17 minutes to tell us how they're using their business to create outcomes aligned with the global goals. And really, it's about engaging our audience that you don't have to be a charity or you don't have to be a billionaire to be able to create some change, and that we can use our business to, yes, make money, be successful, but also do some good in the world, and using the global goals really as a blueprint on how and where to start. And when we started that out, it was very much around this engagement piece. But I think as we're growing, the conversation is almost morphing into it's now our responsibility as company leaders to be working towards outcomes like the global goals, or if you're not on the global goals, you're on something else, but at least there's some sort of purposeful impact happening for people, planet, or society in general. And so, yeah, here we are again, post-COVID, post a little bit of quiet time in 2020, 21. We've just done Sydney and Brisbane recently, had 6 amazing speakers at each event. We've got Perth coming up soon. We will be finishing out the year for 2022 in Adelaide and then Melbourne. 6 speakers from some amazing companies, both large and small. And we use homegrown companies, right? So we don't fly speakers in from other cities. It's all about how do the Perth audience understand what's happening in their Perth community, and we find people locally to come talk. And yeah, short, sharp keynotes to change the world. And it's an events company, Carolyn, but we are very, very quickly turning into a community. It's just
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. It's quite humbling, just watching this community of people come together around this brand. And we really do sit, and I know it's very easy to say, oh yeah, we sit in 17, partnerships for the goals because we're all working together. But our model is very much becoming this community matchmaking opportunity to bring companies together that are values aligned, that can work together, or even just be champions for one another in creating their own impact. And it's a really powerful space to be in, and loving every minute of it.
I bet you are. That's brilliant. And what you're doing is so valuable, not just to the audience, but to the speakers, so they can get their stories out there and build awareness of what they're doing. Can you tell us what kind of, like, who are the audience? Who turns up to these events?
Yeah, absolutely. At the moment, I guess you'd call it, we're in the early adopter phase, if you like. So, certainly people that are already drinking the Kool-Aid to a lot of points. So, but it's a real mix of the SME side of things. So, social enterprise founders, smaller business operators, people really possibly more at the start of their journey in the first few years, and they're trying to find their community, find their tribe, if you like. Um, and then the other side, it's kind of 50-50. And then the other side is that we're getting now a bit more engagement at the corporate level. We're getting a lot of impact, sustainability, ESG leads, CSR, if they're still using that term. We've got some fantastic partnerships at both the national and local levels in some of these cities that really give us, I guess, an inroad to some of these business communities. Every time we go to a city, we kind of partner up with a university whilst we're there.
Yeah.
So we've got some terrific academic connections around the country, which also gives us a little bit of inroad into some of the research that's going on in this space, which is really cool. We've got a climate researcher speaking in Adelaide in a few weeks, which I'm really fascinated to hear what she's up to. Dr. Cassandra Starr. Huge shout out to Cassandra for helping us bring Adelaide to life. But yeah, for the most part at the moment, our community, particularly post-COVID, we kind of had to start again in a lot of ways with some of these cities because, Melbourne, it's the first time we'll be back in Melbourne and Adelaide since 2019. But our mission is to bring people that are not on this train. So next year, our campaign is going to be, please come back to our events and join the party, absolutely, but bring your mate that isn't doing this stuff that needs to hear it.
Yeah.
Let's bring them in and let's do some convincing and engaging. So yeah, that's who. But as you're aware, you get around these circles and the people are just inspiring. They're awesome. It's fun.
Yeah, and you are giving them that platform to inspire others, which is brilliant. So, and I can well imagine that it starts to build that community. Are you doing anything to give that community a place to come together apart from the events?
Well, yeah, funny you asked that. Yes, we will be. I guess sneak preview.
Ooh,
Yeah, so certainly working on how can we authentically bring this community together outside of our events? And what I mean by that is there's one rule for our speakers, apart from 17 minutes, is that they're not allowed to sell. So there's no selling from stage, and it's not an activation. And I'm very, very that's the one thing that I'll never budge on. Is that 17x is not an activation. We're not there to sell into something else. It's there around, we're here to have a conversation, and our three pillars are to educate, engage, and enable action with the global goals, right? So we're not here to sell stuff, so that's got to stand true for me as well, okay? And whilst, yes, a lot of people out there will be like, well, hang on, you still need to work on what is other parts of your business model outside your event. And yes, I'm aware of that. But I really want to stand true to how do we authentically bring this community together to give them a place so that we can fulfill on those three pillars around education, engagement, and enablement. So we are working on a membership style model for next year, but one of the processes inside of that is how we can, again, build that open door policy for our community to do business with one another and to be either working together or just being each other's cheer squad and community. So there are some things in the woodwork, yes. And if you stay tuned to our brand, through all of our stuff, then you'll hear about it pretty soon.
Oh, that's very exciting. So yeah, we'll include links to your website and contact in the show notes so people can continue to follow the journey. Okay, so we're going to have to start wrapping this up, which is a shame because I could just keep chatting to you for ages. Very like-minded views here.
Yeah.
I want to ask you before you go, what's your thinking around the relationship between purpose and profit, love and money?
they have to coexist, because otherwise one doesn't survive without the other.
Yeah.
I think that's basically it, right? Money's not evil. Like profit, you need profit to be able to create the impact. You need profit to be able to employ people. You need profit to be able to put a roof over your head. That's cool. I think that the idea of you're only doing good if you're giving it all away is possibly outdated now. And I understand that there's different levels of purpose in giving and different labels as well. And I get that there's a term for social enterprise and there's a term for circular, and there's, we've got ESG now, and there are different ways, and some social enterprises define themselves because they give away 50% of their profits, and others are a pledge 1% environment. And for me, I don't think any of that really matters around what label you give your purpose or your action or your giving. I think it goes back to that kind of live thing. And if you're really aligned with the outcomes you want to create in the world, whether they're community-based or even just locally and in your own family and your own team and the people that are just working closely within your company, and you're making money from that, that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. And the love that comes in around creating outcomes for the people that are around you and involved in your community and your stakeholders, that it all just coexists now. You can't make money without a bit of love in there, and you can't love what you do without making a bit of money. And for me, it's all circular.
Yeah, and absolutely, that makes complete sense. I heard someone describe it at the Shared Value Summit the other week as purpose is your destination and profit is your fuel to get there.
Awesome.
Yeah, which is a really good way of doing it. Intrepid Travel talk about purpose and profit as a package deal, and that's another great way to look at it. I'm a big believer, obviously, for love and money. I feel like this sense of being apologetic about being profitable or making too much money, we've got to shake free of that idea, because we need to be ambitious. We need to be really ambitious with the impact we want to create. And the more profitable a business is, the more they can scale their impact. And we've got to think big. We can't afford to think small. We can't afford to be apologetic for being successful. We've got to use success to scale impact.
I think we're swimming in the same lane here, Carolyn.
100%. So look, we're recording this in October. This episode will come out, I think, in November. And as you mentioned, you've got, I think, Perth. Is that November still?
No, so Perth is October 26th. So anyone that's listening that may have wanted to hear some of our great speakers, they'll all be on YouTube. They're filmed, so you go check all that out through our website. Adelaide is November 17th. So if you're in Adelaide and this gets out prior to the 17th, come along. We're at Flinders in CBD. And then Melbourne, we are, Melbourne. My goodness, if you can get to Melbourne, you need to come to Melbourne. Melbourne's lineup is just, walk away amazing. I'm really chuffed about Melbourne, and I'm excited, but I haven't announced them yet. So,
I'm excited. What's the date for Melbourne? I might have to fly down.
December 1 at RMIT at the new Academic Research Building, or the newish, but this really, really cool kind of theatre setup they got there. The December lineup, it's probably announced by the time you guys hear this. So, there's some terrific leaders coming and talking. So jump on the website, check it all out. And if you can get into the room on December 1, if it hasn't sold out yet, I would highly recommend you come along, because it'll be our, what do you call it? Is it a, well, it's our final event of the tour. So I guess we'll just have a party at the end of it.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, I'm going to check that out. And if I can, I will be there. And then 2023, you do it all again?
Yeah, look, 2023 is going to be a lot of fun. So this year's just been about really reconnecting with our community and our partners, and, certainly showing up for the love, Carolyn, and how do we just really just really be that megaphone for some of the great people that are doing this, so that we can use that as a springboard to kind of scale a bit for next year.
Yeah.
So 2023, we'll be doing a full Australian tour again, and most likely some of our events will go to full day. So we'll just make them a little bit bigger with some more expert. So that's really exciting. But we also have a pilot 17x youth forum that we're working on for next year with some partners. So that's going to be really cool. So 14 to 24-year-olds in the same format. And if we're lucky enough, we might even have a cheeky event somewhere in Europe next year, but we'll see what happens. But we also have some innovation programs kicking off next year around bringing that community together, as we discussed, and membership models, more podcasts and all sorts. So 2023 is going to be a lot of fun, and I'm on the hunt for some great, amazing purpose-led individuals. So if you know any, send them along to say good day.
I might just happen to be able to do that.
I reckon you might.
Mick, thank you so much for coming on the For Love and Money podcast. I've loved chatting to you, and I haven't yet been to a 17x event, but you will see me, if not at Melbourne, then 100% in 2023.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, grateful to be here. Thanks so much for having me along. I'm super grateful to be a part of your community as well, and congrats on all the great things that you're doing, bringing this kind of conversation to a bigger audience. Love your work.
Cheers, Mick.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the For Love and Money podcast. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into the purpose movement, visit us at thecauseeffect.com.au. And remember, doing good is good for business. So if you're not doing good, then what are you doing?